This is going to be a crash course on NestJs. NestJs is one of the go-to frameworks when you are writing production-ready APIs, and it has its own way of doing things. It has its way of how you write controllers, how you write repositories, how you do validation, and how you handle exceptions. And all of this is what we are going to discuss in this video. This framework is a decorator-heavy framework. That means everything you do on this framework is with the help of a decorator. And if you are new to decorator, I have already made videos on how to write your own decorators and how to use them. You will find the link in the description. Feel free to check that out before you watch this video. Also, another core fundamental concept that NestJs is dependent on is dependency injection. And NestJs heavily relies on dependency injection principle. And as always, if you are looking to brush up your skill on dependency injection, or if you are new to dependency injection, as always, my videos are there in the link. You can check those out before you proceed on this particular framework. So in this course, we are going to build a simple API, simple CRUD API with MongoDB in the backend, and we are going to learn all the fundamental concept associated with NestJs. So let's not waste much time. Let's directly go to this screen and start writing some code. Now let us start building our API step by step. So of course you need Node.js to be installed, and with Node.js comes npm, right? So we are going to use npm to first install the NestJs CLI, right? So I'll show you the command. So what you can do is npm, okay, install, and we are going to install it globally in our system, right? So I'll say -g, okay, and I will say at nestjs/cli. This you can install, and if you want you can add this optional latest flag, right? So this will always install the latest NestJs CLI, right? I already have this CLI installed, so I'm not going to run this command. Now I'll show you if the Nest CLI is installed or not. So what you can do is you can say nest-v. Okay, so this will give you the NestJs version that you have installed in your system, or the NestJs CLI, right? So for me it is 11.0.6. Now depending at what time you are watching, you might have a higher version than this. Okay, now we are going to use the NestJs CLI first of all to scaffold our Dart project, and then subsequently we are going to use it to generate modules, controllers, and services, and all those things, right? So those are the core essential of a NestJs project, and we are going to use NestJs to scaffold all those entities for us. Okay, so I will clear the console and I will say nest new, and you have to give a project name. So I'm going to say restaurant API, and I will say NestJs. Okay, and I will hit enter. Now this will ask me what package manager I'm going to use. Okay, and I'm going to stick with the good old npm. Okay, so I'll hit enter, and it will start scaffolding the project for us, and of course it will take some time, right? So let us wait patiently for the CLI to bootstrap the project, and then we'll proceed further. Okay, great. So our installation is completed successfully. Now what it is saying, it is giving us two commands. Okay, so it is saying cd into the newly created directory, and inside this directory we have the project structure, right, that we will see very soon. And then it is saying npm run start. Okay, so let me first, okay, go into this directory. Okay, so I'll say cd restaurant API NestJs. Okay, and I will open this with my favorite code editor, VS Code. So here I'll say yes, I trust the author, and here I will first go to package.json, and what I'm going to do, instead of the start command that it was suggesting earlier, I'm going to run start dev. Okay, this command I will run. So what I will do, I will clear the console, and I will say npm run, and it will say start :dev. Okay, let me run this command. So it will start compiling and it will run the project for us. Okay, great. Now let us check what folder structure we get, right? So when we created the starter template, what are the content of that one, right? So first of all, of course, this is a TypeScript project, right? NestJs, of course, you can write it in JavaScript as well, but most of the time that I have used only it with TypeScript, right? So this is basically a TypeScript project, right? So if you see, we have tsconfig and we have nest CLI JSON, right? So these are all the housekeeping stuff that we have, right? And we have the node modules, we have the dist folder, and we have the test folder. In this video, of course, we are not going to deal with testing, right? So let us check the package.json, right? So here we have a couple of commands, right? The build command, the format command that is going to use prettier, right? The start command, the dev command. Okay, then how to start this in prod, right? That is the command. We have linter command, and we have a lot of command on test, right? Then we have the dependency. So what are the dependency? Of course, we have the NestJs dependency, right? The common, the core, and we are going to use NestJs with Express. Okay, then we have RxJS, reflection, metadata, and everything, right? So these are part of the dev dependency. These are part of the dependency. Then we have dev dependency, right? It has all the linter and all the NestJs CLI, the types, okay, ESLint and everything, right? So we don't have to dig deep into this unless you want to change something from here. And in this course, of course, we are not going to change anything here, right? Now let us check the SRC. Okay, this is the important part. So we have the main.ts, right? And the main.ts is very simple. Okay, what it is doing, it has a bootstrap function that is creating a NestJs project. Okay, so it is creating an app which is coming from Nest factory, and the app is simply listening on a given port. Okay, and we are calling the bootstrap. Now if you see the app module, right? So now it is a good time for me to introduce you to the basic building block of a NestJs. Okay, it is a module. Everything that we are going to write, okay, so we are going to write controllers, okay, we are going to write service, we are going to write repositories. Okay, these are all the things that we are eventually learn in this course, right? Everything is categorized into a single module. Okay, so a module is a logical entity. Okay, so say for example auth module. Okay, the authentication system could be one module, right? The orders could be one module. Okay, the users could be one module, right? And say for example menu and recipes, they can be part of different modules, right? So each logical entity or each domain of our project, okay, it can be a separate module, and by default NestJs ships with a app module, right? So if we see a app module, right, so this is what the app module looks like. Okay, so what exactly is a module? So it is nothing but a class, okay, and most importantly it is decorated with @module decorator. Okay, now beforehand let me tell you, NestJs is a decorator heavy pattern. Okay, we write lots and lots of decorators for this. We use lots and lots of decorators. NestJs out of the box gives us a lot of decorators. Okay, and we can write even our own decorators. Okay, so NestJs is built up on two things. One is the decorator and one is the dependency injection. These two are the core fundamental building block of any NestJs project. Okay, now so import, okay, controllers and providers. So controllers, right? If we are adding controllers in a module, we have to attach it to the controllers of this module decorator. Okay, this is an array and we can add multiple controllers, right? Now what are providers? All these services that we are going to use in this module, okay, we are going to add it as part of the provider list. When we add it to the provider list, it will be part of the dependency injection container, right? And then we can inject it in other service or in controllers. Okay, so that's how basic dependency injection works, and of course I'll explain you in detail later in this course, right? And then we have imports. So if you want to import something from another module, right, and similarly we can do export. Okay, that we will of course see later. So here by default, okay, NestJs CLI gives us a app module, and this app module is actually added as part of the Nest factory. Now we are going to add subsequent modules, and we are going to add those modules as part of the app modules using this import array. Okay, so we might be building 5, 6, 10, 15 modules, right? All those will together link in the app module, and the app module is linked to the main bootstrap function. So that's how all our module will come into picture. Okay, great. So now we have the app module, and of course we are going to write our own module. Okay, so the app module is there, but we are not going to use the app.service and app.controller and app.controller.spec.ts. okay, the spec.ts are basically the test file, and in this module, in this course, we are not going to deal with testing. Okay, so what I usually do when I bootstrap a new project, I usually delete all this. Okay, you don't have to delete the app module, otherwise it will start throwing error. Okay, we will delete the app.service, app.controller, and app.controller.spec. Okay, so this I will delete. Okay, then of course this will throw error, so I will remove this one, and I will remove this one also, right? I'll keep the array empty so that my project is not bulky, it's clean. Okay, so I will save this and I will open the terminal and just see everything is working properly. Okay, there are no errors after we have deleted those files. Okay, now let us first create a module. Okay, so how do we create a module? We write a class and we decorate this with @module decorator. When we are writing modules again and again, this could be cumbersome to write and even to remember, right? So that's why NestJs gives us command to add modules. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I have this project, the server running through the npm run start dev command. I will go to another command prompt. Okay, and here I will navigate to my project. Okay, and here what I will do, I will say nest okay, generate module. Okay, and I'll give the module a name. Okay, so since we are building a restaurant management or API that deals with restaurant management, let us first add a menu module. Okay, so we'll build small step and eventually we'll end up into a bigger project. Okay, so let us first generate one single module and let us call it as a menu module. Okay, so this will hold all the menu related code for us. Okay, so let me call it as menu. Okay, and I will hit enter. So what this will do, this will generate module for me. Okay, so if you see here, there is a create command. Okay, and it has created something. Okay, so what it has created, src menu and menu.model.ts it has created. Okay, so this is what we were expecting, right? So when we create a module, it will eventually create a new file and a new folder, right? But if you see this, there is an update and it has updated something in app.module.ts, right? So this is interesting. Let us check what it has updated. Okay, so here in src, of course, it has created a menu.module, and here we don't have anything as of now. So we have a menu module and it is decorated with the module decorator. So we will know that this menu is a module now. Now if you see app module, what it has done in import, it has added the menu module. What this is actually doing is, this is kind of adding the menu module into the app module, and this app module is added to the main bootstrap function, right? So that's how all the modules are linked together. Okay, and when we will add more modules, this will be added here. Okay, so we don't have to touch this manually. The NestJs CLI will do most of the job for us. Okay, so now let us open the terminal and go to our server. Go to the terminal where our server is running, and just to see that everything is running properly, right? There are no errors. Okay, perfect. Now we have a module. Now what we will do with this module? So let us add a controller to this module. Okay, so module can have controllers and service and pipes and interceptors and all those things, right? We'll slowly learn everything. So we already have a module, the menu module, right? And let us start adding some component to this. Okay, otherwise what is the point of having a module, right? So again, our NestJs CLI will help us in creating a controller. Okay, so here I will say nest, okay, generate what? Generate controller. Okay, controller where, on which module, right? There could be multiple modules, right? So where we want to generate a controller, we want to generate controller on the menu model. So I will say menu, and I will add a flag no spec. Okay, so what this will do, the no spec flag, it will tell the NestJs CLI to not generate the test file or the spec files. Okay, so I will run this. Great, so it has created menu.controller.ts and it has updated menu.module.ts, right? So let us see what it has done. So if you see menu controller, okay, we have a controller here. And again, what makes a class a controller class? This controller decorator, right? So if you see the menu model, what makes a class a module decorator, right? In the same line, what makes a class controller class? Of course, the controller decorator, right? And this is the path for that controller. Okay, so how do we access this controller? We'll go to our website URL. In my case, it would be say localhost :3000/menu, right? And if you want, you can add more properties, right? /menu/main menu, right? So you have to go to your URL /menu/main menu, right? You can add any path that you want to add, right? So now we have a menu controller, but what this will exactly do? This is not doing anything, right? So this is just a controller simply sitting, right? So let us start adding some content to this. Now what we will add? So let us add all the functions for a CRUD operation on, say, for example, menu, right? So if we talk about CRUD operation on a menu, what we will add? Okay, let us discuss that. So let me add get all menu items. Okay, then I will add get menu item by a given ID. Then we'll say create menu item. Then we will do a update menu item, and of course then we'll do a delete menu item. Okay, so let me create the basic function for that. Okay, so I'll say get, okay, all menu. Okay, and I'll just create the function body for now. Okay, then I'll say get, okay, menu by ID. Okay, and I'll add the function body. Okay, then I will say create menu. Okay, and in the same line I will say update menu. Okay, and I will say delete menu. Okay, now each of the function corresponds to one particular REST API convention. Okay, now how do we link, say for example, a get call to the menu API path, or a post call to the menu API path, or the delete call, right? So these are the REST HTTP methods, right? The get, post, put, delete, patch, those kind of things, right? So ultimately we want to map it, right? If I do a get call on the menu item, I should be able to call my get all menu function, right? And say for example, if I put a delete operation, delete HTTP method, it should come to this delete menu function, right? So how do I map that one? Okay, so for this, if you have noticed till now, everything is controlled by decorators, right? And to achieve the function mapping between our code and the REST HTTP method, we also are going to use decorators. Okay, so here I will say add, okay, we'll say get. This is a decorator. Okay, and what it is saying, it is unable to find the get method. So I'll say quick fix and let it import from nest common. Okay, great. So now when I make a get call to the menu API path, this function will be executed. Okay, then this is also a get function, but it will take another parameter. Okay, and I will call it a /id. Okay, so if you see here, I have some example already set. So if you see here, this is localhost menu, and we are using the get function here, right? And here if you see, this is also a localhost 3000/menu/ the menu ID, right? And this is also going to be a get call. So this ABC, or whatever parameter value that you want to pass, or the menu ID, okay, that we want to receive, right? So this is a different API path, and this is a different API path, right? And what is different between these two? This params, right? So I'll come to my code. Okay, and here this is the :id, right? So this ID value will be mapped to the API parameter that I'm passing, and this will call this method, right? Similarly, how do we map the post method? Of course, for this we have the post decorator. Okay, and this is imported, and here what we have the put decorator, right? This will be a put method, and this will be a delete method, right? Delete HTTP method, right? And the delete HTTP method will also take a params HTTP params, right? And even the update menu item is also going to take a param, right? Great. So here we have mapped a controller function to the API URL, and each of the URL is associated with the HTTP method, right? So if you see here, we are sending with post. Okay, here if you see, we are sending it with put, right? And if you see here, we have the delete method, right? So we have done the function mapping. Great. So what this is going to return for now, let us return a simple string. Okay, return this is the function to get all menu items. Okay, and similarly I will add here, okay, return this is the function to get one menu item by id. Okay, and here I will say return, okay, this is the function to create a new menu item. Okay, and here I will say update. Here also I'll say, okay, this is the function to update a menu by id. Okay, and here I will say return this is the function to delete a menu by id. Okay, so we have added all the controller. Right now this being done, I will come here and let me send a request. Okay, so what this is saying, this is a function to get all the menu items, and if I come here and if I send the request, what this will do, this is the function to get one menu item by id. Okay, and here also if I send this one, this is a function to create a new menu item, and similarly for update and similarly for delete. Okay, so now we have the function mapping done. So now let us do couple of minor refinements on this. Okay, so first of all, we should be able to read this params, right? So get menu by id, and for update also we are sending a id, and for delete also we are sending a id. Okay, so we should be able to read this id, right? So now let us see how to read this id. So here what you have to do, here in get you are saying :id, right? So this is the name that you are giving to your query params, right? So the NestJS has another decorator, okay, and it is called as @params. Okay, @param, and you have to pass the id here. Okay, and then you have to name this as id, and this will be of type string. Okay, so if this is confusing, let me explain. So this is the function parameter and this is the type. Okay, now we are adding this decorator to this function property or the function parameter. So what this will do, this will read the HTTP request and the param that we are sending, that we have named id, that it will read here and assign its value to this id variable. Okay, and this id variable, then we can use it in our subsequent request. So say for example I will add, okay, I will add and I will say plus id. Okay, so which id is this id. Okay, now similarly I will copy this one, and where else I can use it here, and I can use it here on the update and on the delete, right? And similarly I will copy this one and I will paste it here and I will paste it here. Okay, and some extra text has been copied, so this I will remove. Okay, and I will finish it with semicolon, right? Great. So now we are able to read the query params, right? So let us see this one. So let me open the terminal. Okay, and if you see, there are no errors, right? So our terminal is running clean. Okay, so I will come to the postman and I will send a request. Okay, so if you see here, it says :abc, right? And if I come here and I'll say update menu, we are getting the id that we are passing here, right? And similarly this delete. Okay, so here also we are able to pass the value. Okay, so this is how you can read the params, the URL parameter, right? Next, say for example get all menu. Okay, here this will give me list of all menu, right? Say for example I want to filter. Okay, and I want to add, okay, and say filter equals to veg. Okay, only vegetarian menu items you have to give me, right? So this is what is called as a query string, right? Now if I send this request, okay, I should be able to read this request as well, right? So how can I get the query value here? So for that we have another decorator, and of course it is named as query. So I will say query and I will pass what? I'll pass filter. Okay, I'll pass filter. Okay, and just like how we have done it here in params, I will give it a name. Okay, so as usual, you can of course give a name, but I'll give it as filter and I'll say string. And here if I want, okay, I can add a colon and I'll say plus and I'll say filter. Okay, now let us run this and see what we are getting. So I'll say I'll send this request. Okay, and here I'm getting colon veg, right? And if I say for example vegan, okay, and if I send the request, I'll get vegan, right? So this is how I can send the query parameters, and I'll read the query params in my NestJs project. Okay, great. Now one more thing. So here I have the delete HTTP method, right? And I'm trying to delete something. And if you see here, it says 200. Okay, and this is also correct. Okay, if I send this, I'll get 200 okay status. Okay, but I think, and this is how I implement in all my delete APIs, the delete should return a no content status, that is a 204. Okay, 204 no content, because you have deleted something, right? It is deleted, it should give you no content, right? So how do we achieve this one? So I'll open the NestJs project, and here I will add another decorator. Okay, and this is going to be a regular pattern that we will see. Whatever we want to achieve, we have to use some kind of decorator for that, right? And to achieve this, I will say HTTP code of 204. Okay, so now instead of 200, I am overriding a particular controller method with my own HTTP status code. Okay, so if you see here, I will now send a request, and what it is saying, 204 no content, and I did not get back the previous string that I used to get, right? So this is how we can override the default HTTP status that is given by NestJs, right? Let us come to the create new request, right? And here we are sending a JSON object, right? So we are dealing with a menu, right? So it has a name, it has a description, it has a price, it has a cuisine, and it has a preference, right? Vegetarian, non-vegetarian, vegan, and its availability status, right? So this is a kind of menu that I have designed that we are going to use in this course. Okay, so a very basic menu example, right? Now I'm sending it, but how we are going to read this, right? Are we reading this yet? No, right? We are not reading this. Okay, so how do we read this one? So again, to read this one, we have another decorator. Okay, and this time it is called as the body. Okay, body, and we are going to say create menu, okay, item. And now comes the question, what will be the type? So if you see here, the filter was of type string, the ID was of type string, but what will be the type of the create menu item, right? For now, okay, for now let us call it as any. Okay, and this body is showing squiggly. Okay, so let us go to quick fix. Okay, and I will import it from nest common. Okay, great. Now let me save this one, and here once this is saved, I will say console.log the create menu item. Okay, I will save this one, and I'll open the terminal, and if you see, this mapping has now started coming. So menu get menu slash id, then slash menu of post, okay, menu of id of put, then menu of id of delete, right? So this is giving all the HTTP methods that we have added till now in the menu controller, right? Now I'll come to Postman and I will send this request. Okay, now if we go to console, you can see here this is locked. Now the HTTP request or the body that we are sending, that we are able to log it, right? Okay, so now we are able to log this, but we have this problem, right? What will be the type? We cannot keep it as any, right? Because that is not a good practice. Here I want to introduce you to another core fundamental concept of NestJS, that is a DTO, a data transfer object. Okay, what does this mean? This is the type which the controller method is expecting to receive. Okay, here see what stops me from changing name to recipe name to menu name, right? Or say for example price, I can change it to cost, right? Or diet preference, I can change it to veg instead of vegetarian, right? Instead of is available, I can change it to availability, right? So I need a concrete definition of what type of data and what will be the name of that data, right? A concrete TypeScript type. Okay, and this type is what we call it as a DTO, data transfer object. So this will help us in transferring the data from the HTTP request into our controller, into our Nest controller, right? So this is nothing but just a class, okay, and it has all the definition. Okay, so what do? We'll create a type. Okay, basically we'll create a class. So here I'll say new folder and I'll call it as DTO. Okay, and we'll add a new file and we'll say create menu.dto.ts, right? Simple. And we'll say export class create menu dto, right? Perfect. Right, now what will be the content of this one? So we have name, description, price, cuisine, that preference, and is available, right? So let me quickly add that one. So we'll say name, okay, and it is of type string. Then description, it is also going to be of type string. Then price, okay, price is going to be of type number. Then cuisine, this is also going to be of type string, okay, and we'll say diet preference, and this is also going to be of type string, okay, and here is available, and this is going to be of type boolean, right? Great. Now I will take this create menu and come to controller, and instead of the any I will say create menu dto, right? Now once I do this, I'll start getting intelligence. Okay, so I can say name, or I can say create menu item dot say is available, right? Perfect. Now I will save this one and I'll keep the console log, and here let me log the full create menu item. Okay, now here say for example I will not send is available true. Okay, what will happen? Nothing will happen, right? And if we go to our console, it will log, but it will not log the availability status, right? Say for example price, okay, I will send it as string and say abc, right? Now I will send the request. What will happen? Nothing, right? Nothing has happened. It has logged the price as abc, but price cannot be a abc, right? It has to be a number, right? Now where is that definition where we are saying that the price should be a number, right? So there is one way we usually do. Okay, here we can say add, okay, if say for example create menu item dot price, and we can say type of this price should be of number, right? We can do all this validation, but that is a very messy way of doing, right? And since we are using a scalable production ready framework, we don't have to do this, right? There are ways of doing this, the NestJs or the clean way of doing it, right? So let us learn how to do the DTO validation or the schema validation, right? So for this, what I will do, I will install two packages. Okay, so I'll clear and I'll say npm install, okay, class validator, and I will add class transformer. Okay, and I will install these two packages. Okay, now the package is added. Okay, now I will come to my DTO, and here I am saying I will add some decorator and tell the NestJs to do some validation based on the decorator. Okay, so say for example price, okay, price, it should be a number, so I'm going to say is number. Okay, now it will automatically do the validation for us that you cannot send anything in the price, it has to be a number, right? Now similarly the name, right, it has to be a string, so I'm going to say is string, right? And I will also say is not empty, you cannot send an empty string, right? This is what I'm not going to accept. Then add is string, right? Here also I will add a string, and here the description I'm going to say as optional, right? This is the scenario that I'm going to design, right? You might have a different scenario that you want to build, right? So I'm going to say add is optional. When I'm saying is optional, I'll add a question mark here. Okay, so this is optional is for the NestJs to do the validation, and this is the TypeScript optional. Okay, in doing the code completion or doing the code validation, this TypeScript will consider this as optional, right? This question mark is for TypeScript, and this is optional is for the NestJS, right? And here we have is number, and cuisine and diet preference we will see in some time, but before that I will add. Okay, what I should add? I should add is boolean, right? So this is the decorator that I'm going to add. Great. Now here we are saying name as string and description as optional, price is number. Now we have two things pending. Okay, one is cuisine and one is diet preference. Okay, now the cuisine, I don't want it to be a simple string but a array of string, right? I do not want to add any random data, like ABC is not a cuisine, right? I want to define a preset of cuisine that can be used in this system. Similarly, for diet preference, I want to keep it as veg, not vegetarian, right? Or vegan, or egg, not vegetarian, right? So this kind of constraints I want to add. I don't want somebody to add any value that they want. Okay, it should come from a list of predefined values, right? And what is the best way of adding predefined values? Of course, enum, right? So what I will do, in menu I will create a new file and I will say menu.enum.ts, right? And here what I will do, just to save some time, because this is not a dedicated TypeScript course, so I will simply add the enum. I have here two enum, one is cuisine type and one is diet preference, and it has North Indian, Chinese, Italian and Mexican and continental, right? You can add any value that you want. Okay, and similarly for diet preference, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, vegan, egg, and if you want you can add few more properties, but I think this much is enough, right? Now this is the enum. I want it to enforce it on cuisine, right? So how can I do that? So this cuisine, see, just like how we have is string, is number, is boolean, also I have is enum, right? And we will pass the enum. So I'll say cuisine type, right? And similarly I will say is enum, and I will say diet preference, which is again coming from menu.enum.ts, right? Great. So now are we all set? So now if I send price as ABC, I should get error, but I did not get any error, right? Did I get any error? No, right? Or say for example vegetarian, instead of vegetarian I send 1 2 3, right? And I send, but since we have added the class validator, I should be able to get the error, right? But I'm not getting the error, right? Instead it is happily logging this vegetarian 1 2 3, right? So what else is missing? We have to enable the validation pipeline at a global level, or you can add it at the controller, or you can add it at the controller method level, right? For us, for our use case, okay, I am going to add it at the global level, right? So how can I add this one? To add this, I will come to main, okay, and here in app I can say app.use global pipes. Okay, these are validation pipes. Okay, and I will say new validation pipe, and I will use the constructor, class constructor here, right? Now I will add this one. Okay, and now I will come here and I will send a request. See, now what we are getting? We are getting error. Price must be a number. Diet preference must be one of the following: vegetarian, non-vegetarian, egg, right? Everything is available must be a boolean, right? So what I will do, I will revert everything. Okay, now this is a clean menu and this is what I want, right? So I send it, right? Now we are getting the function value. We are not getting any error basically, right? So here we are getting the clean clean console log, right? This console log is happening at the controller, right? That means everything is, all the validation have successfully passed, and now we have reached our controller layer, right? Perfect. Now similarly we have in update, right? So say for example this price, okay, is 240. I want to update it to 250, right? So here also we should be able to do the same validation, right? Now can we use the create menu DTO for update, right? Can we? The answer is no, right? Why? Because to do the update or patch, in this case we have a put request, but there can be a patch request also, right? And for patch request we will not send all the value that we want to, all the value in the document or in the REST API as part of the body, right? We might send partial data, right? So for example, I don't want to update name, I don't want to update description, I want to update only price, right? So for this, we have to create another DTO for update, right? It is always a good practice not to mix DTOs. We should write different DTOs for different methods, because when we are writing a DTO, it might look similar, but as and when the app grows, the requirement for different DTO might change, right? So to achieve this, what we will do, we will create another DTO, and I will call it as update menu dot DTO dot ts, right? And here what we can do, we can copy paste this and change it to create menu DTO, and we can mark everything as is optional, right? That is one way of doing this, but if there is even a cleaner way, why to do code repetition, right? So for this, what we will do, I'll install another package. Okay, so I'll clear this one and I'll say npm install at NestJs slash mapped types. Okay, I'll install this one. Then what is the use of this mapped types? Okay, so I'll come to update menu and I will say export class update menu DTO, right? Update menu DTO, and this is going to extend from what? Extend from create menu DTO, right? Now if it is extending, of course it will have all the same properties, right? But we don't want to have same property, so I will add a partial type. Okay, partial type of create menu DTO. Right now, what is the meaning of this partial type? And before that, and let me import this, right? So import, okay, something from at NestJs mapped type, and I will call it a partial type. And of course this spelling is not correct, so I'll correct the spelling here, right? So what will this partial type do? So this will make all the properties of this create menu DTO as optional, right? And on top of that, if we want, we can of course add more properties to the update menu, right? So this will extend from the create menu DTO, right? And where do we use that one? So we'll come to menu controller, and just like in body we have the create menu item, the same thing we can do it in update menu. But in update menu we already have one parameter, that is the ID. After this we can add the body, right? So I will say add body, and I will call it as update menu item, and it will be of type update menu DTO, right? Now we are able to receive the update menu item here, right? So a big chunk of our validation for the update menu is also completed, right? So now if I send, say for example, a string in price, right? So what will happen? Of course it is going to throw error. Okay, and it is throwing error because of the JSON syntax, so I should use the double quotes, right? And I'll send the request. Okay, now this is coming from our NestJs API, and it is saying price must be a number, right? So we are able to do the validation both on update as well as on the menu, on the create. Okay, and we are going and we have used the class validator for that one, right? And for that we have enabled the global validation pipes. Great. So now our controller is completed, but we are not doing anything in the controller, right? What we are doing, we are just simply returning a string, right? But what should the controller deal with? Should it deal with business logic? Of course not. Controller should never deal with business logic. It should only deal with getting the HTTP request and sending the HTTP response, and maybe couple of validation through middleware like authentication and authorization, right? Or the DTO schema validation, right? So those kind of things the controller layer should do, right? It should not ever deal with business logic, right? Okay, but if controller is not going to deal with business logic, then who is going to deal with business logic? Okay, so for that we have the concept of service. A service is nothing but a class, okay, and it will have all the core business logic, and our controller is going to call this service method pass the data, get the value, return it back to the client. That much is the only task for controller. It should never deal with business logic. Okay, great. So here in our controller we are returning something, right? Okay, so now we'll offload this value to a service. Okay, now what is a service? Of course it is a class and it has a particular decorator, right? So let us see. So as always, we have generated the module from NestJs CLI. We have generated the controller from the NestJs CLI. Similarly, we can generate service from the NestJs CLI, right? So I'll clear the console and I will say nest generate service. Okay, on service on which module? On the menu module. Okay, and I will say no spec. Okay, so it will generate a service for me, right? So it has created a service menu.service.ts and it has updated something in the menu module, right? So let us see that one. So if you see here, menu.service is added, that class, and if you see, this is decorated with a injectable decorator, right? Now that means once I decorate this as a injectable, this now becomes a part of the dependency injection framework, right? And we don't have to explicitly create an instance of menu service. It will be automatically done by the NestJs framework. All we have to do is to inject it into the place where we want to eventually use it, right? So that much only we have to do, right? And if you go to menu module, as part of provider, okay, the menu service is added. So we already have a controller, that is menu controller, and we have a menu service, right? So it is added as part of provider, right? Once this is added, we can now start injecting that into other controllers and even to other service, and even we can export the service from one module to another module, and we can import it from one module to another module, right? Great. So we have a menu service, right? So now let us come to menu service. Okay, now what should the menu service do? The menu service should have a corresponding function for each of the controller method, right? So say for example, get all menu. So when I'm doing get all menu, all I have to do is to call a particular method in the service layer, okay, and pass the necessary parameter, right? So say for example, get all menu, right? So I'll have a method. Okay, so I'll say get all menu. Of course, if you want, you can change the name. So here I'll say get all, I'll say get menu by ID, right? And I'll say here I'll say create new menu. Okay, and here I will say update menu by ID, right? And here I will say delete menu by ID, right? And I will create the function for this one, right? Now get all menu, what parameter it is receiving? As such, it is not receiving anything, right? So just for the demonstration purpose, I have added the query, but we'll keep it here. Okay, we'll not pass it to the service, and for the purpose of this video, we are not going to deal with query, right? In future video, I will show you how to write query, how to receive multiple queries, and based on that, when we have a database integrated, I'll show you how to create a builder pattern, so that based on the query parameters, right, you can have one query parameter, you can have two query parameters, right? Based on that, it will create a query for you, a query builder class, right? That later on in some future video we will see that. Okay, but as such, in this video we are not going to work with query. I'll keep this here for your reference, but down this service I will not pass the filter. Okay, so this will not receive anything, but this is going to receive something, right? This is going to receive a id of type string, right? Which ID? This ID that we are getting it from the parent, right? So eventually we'll pass it to the service. And similarly, this create menu, what this will receive? This will receive a create menu item. And what will be the type of this one? This will be of type create menu DTO, right? And here the update menu by ID, of course it is going to receive the ID, and it will receive the update menu item, and this is going to be of type update menu DTO, right? And this one, this ID of type string, right? Okay, now what I will do, I will just copy this line okay, and I will come to this service and paste it here. That means I'm just trying to offload the controller business logic, and for our example this is the business logic, right? Of course eventually we will add a lot of more content, but for our purpose the return of the string is a business logic here, right? So this I will offload it to the service, and here it is giving error in the filter, right? Because we don't have this filter parameter here, right? So I will paste this one, and similarly I will take this, okay, cut it, okay, and I will paste it here, right? And similarly I'll not take the console log anymore, okay. We have already seen that we are getting the value, right? So I'll return, take the return statement, cut it, and I will paste it here, right? And similarly I will come to the update, okay, and I will cut and I'll add it here, okay. And the delete also I'll do the same thing, okay. I will come and add it here, perfect, okay. So now we have uploaded everything to the service, and here I'll delete this one, okay, because instead of cut I did copy. Anyways, we don't need this, right? Now how are we going to use this service? We have to inject the service, right? And how do we inject the service? We will do it in constructor, right, as a property of this class, right, as a private property of this class, right? So I will say constructor, okay, and I'll add the constructor function, right? And here I will say private read only, I'll say menu service, and this is going to be of type menu service, right? And of course the dependency injection framework that is baked into the NestJs, that will take the responsibility of creating an instance of the menu service, and it will inject it, right? So here we don't have to use the new keyword, new menu service, right? We don't do that. So we are going to use the dependency injection framework, and we are directly going to inject it into our constructor, right? Now once this is injected, what we have to do, we will say just, okay, return this dot, okay, menu service dot get all menu, right? All we have to do is this, okay. Similarly here, okay, return this dot menu service dot get menu by id, and I will pass the id. This is all controller will do. It will simply get the parameter or the query or the body from the http call and pass it to the menu, and whatever the menu returns, it will send it. This is all is going to be the responsibility of the controller. Controller will never deal with any business logic or validation or connecting to the database, adding to the database, nothing. It will simply offload its value to the service method, right? And here create, what I will do, return this dot menu service dot create new menu item, and I will pass the create menu item, the function parameter, right? And here I will say return this dot menu service dot update menu, and it will take id and it will take the update menu item, right? Perfect. And here also we'll do the same thing, return this dot menu service dot delete menu by id, and it will take the id parameter, right? Perfect. So now let us check the console and see if everything is working properly, and we have no errors, right? So everything is working properly here. Then when we go to postman and we try to send some value, we will get, right, this is the function to get all the menu items, and this is the function to get menu item one by one by id abc, right? And we have the create menu. So everything is working as expected, so everything is in place now, and all we have done is we have moved everything, all the business logic, to a service layer, right? And so far, if you are liking this video, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of content I bring to this channel on a regular basis. And let's continue on the video. Okay, great. So now that we have completed the controller and the service layer, and now let us move to the database. Let us implement a real database. And for the purpose of this course, I will be using MongoDB. So I have a dedicated MongoDB instance running in my system. But if you want, you can use a Docker instance, or you can use a cloud provider, or you can use the MongoDB Community Edition. And I'll be using the MongoDB Compass to to see our database and the collection and the items inside that, right? So first let us set up the MongoDB. Now to set up the MongoDB, what I have to do, I'll go to my terminal and my server is already running, right? So I'll go to another prompt and I'll install two packages. Okay, so I will say npm install at NestJs slash mongoose and the native mongoose package. So I'll hit enter and I'll let these two packages installed in my project. Now this is installed. I will come to my app module, and here in the list of import I already have the menu module, and in this array I want to add the mongoose module as well. So this is how I'll set up the basic configuration to use the MongoDB in my system. So I'll add a comma and I will say mongoose module dot for root. So this is the function, and what this will take, this will take the connection URI. So what I will do, since this is running in my local, so I'm going to use the localhost, and at the end you have to add the database name. And if you are taking it from a cloud provider, you of course must have set a username and password, and if you go to their interface, they will give you the connection URI. How would you connect? Okay, so most of the provider, they will give you the connection URI, so you can use that one. For me it is simple, no ID and password, it is just localhost, port number and the database name, right? It is as simple as that. Now my project knows where to connect to the database. Then what I will do, I'll create a schema. So MongoDB, we have to store some data, right? And of course it has to have a schema. So let me first design the schema. So here in the menu, I'll create a new file and I will call it as menu.schema.ts. And what is a schema? Nothing but a class. So I'll say export class menu. Okay, and this is a class, right? What makes this a schema? So I have to use the decorator, and that decorator is called as schema, and it will come from NestJs mongoose. So this tells the NestJs project that this class is going to be a class definition for a MongoDB document. So what value we will add? We will add name. It will be of type string. Okay, and we have to add a decorator. It is called as prop. Okay, that means the property of this schema, and we can pass the configuration object, and I'll say required true. So this property is now required. So this is how you are going to tell that this name is going to be a property of our MongoDB schema. Okay, in the same line, I'll say prop, and I will say description, and this is also going to be of type string. Then I will say at prop, and this is going to be a price, and this will be of type number, and I want to mark it as the required true. Then what value I have? I have the cuisine, so I'll say cuisine of type string. Okay, and I'll say prop. Okay, and in prop it will be of type string. Okay, and it will adhere to the enum. Which enum? We have created the cuisine type enum, right? So I'll say object dot values. It will extract all the values from the cuisine type. Okay, and this value is a required value. So I'll say required true, right? And in the same line, what I can do? I can do diet preference. So I'll say diet preference of type string. Okay, and the prop or the property value will be, okay, type of string, then enum of object dot values of diet preference. Okay, and this is going to be required, and I will say true. Now of course, if you don't want to make it required based on your business need, you can do so, right? And I'll say is available, and this is going to be of type boolean, and I will add the property decorator to this one. So I will say prop. Okay, and type will be boolean. Okay, and it will default to say, for example, false. Now this is just the schema definition, right? Now I have to create the actual schema. So I'll say const menu schema equals to, I have a function called as schema factory dot create for class and I'll pass the menu. So this will create the actual schema. So this is just the class definition of how the schema would look like, and this will actually create the schema instance for me. So this I will export. Great. So now I have the menu schema handy with me. Now since I have created the schema, what I will do, I'll create a repository. So repository will have the dedicated CRUD operation on this schema, and that particular repository I will use in my service layer. So let me quickly add the repository. So I'll say menu.repository.ts, right? And now what will be the content of this repository? So it will be basically a class, okay, and I will call it as menu repository, and most importantly it will have the @injectable decorator. Right now, since this is a service and I have named it as a repository, but actually this is a service, right? So if this is a service, what I have to do, I have to add it to my menu module, right? So I'll come to my menu module, okay, and in the providers I have the menu service, then I will have the menu repository. Okay, now I'll come to menu repository and start adding all the values. So first what we need to inject the schema, right? And how do we inject? We inject it through the constructor. So this is my constructor, right? And here I will say add inject model, okay, what menu dot name. So this is the name of the module that we want to inject, okay, and it will be private, okay, read only menu model, okay, and this will be of type model, and this is of generic type, so this will take the menu instance. So this is how I inject, okay, the menu schema or the menu model that we have created in the previous step. Now this menu model has all the CRUD operation like the find all or find by ID and update, all the typical MongoDB schema related operations, right? Great. So first method, what I will add, let me add find all. So find all, and it will return a promise, okay, promise of a menu array, right? And here what I have to do, I have to return this dot menu model dot find, okay, find what, or what will be the filter? So there won't be any filter, okay, so it will give us everything, and we'll add a projection, and in this projection what I will do, I will say the underscore v as 0. Okay, now what do I mean by this? So the MongoDB schema, when a document is entered, it will have a underscore id, the unique id that is generated by the MongoDB, and we have a underscore version. This underscore version I don't want to expose to the outside. So here what I'm doing a projection, and this can take properties of the schema, and it can take 1 or 0. 1 means I want to add that property in my projection, and if it is a 0, that means I don't want to add it. So when I say underscore v as 0, that means it will skip the underscore v and it will take everything else. This is similar to a select statement if we talk in terms of SQL database, right? So this part is completed. So then I'll go to find by id. So here I will say find by id, and the id will take a string, and what this will return? This will return a promise of menu or null. Possible it might be null, right? The id that we have provided, that id might not exist in the database, right? So I will say return this dot menu model dot find by id, and I'll pass the id, okay, and I'll do the similar projection underscore v as 0. So it will skip the version and it will return me everything else. Then let us write the function to create the menu. So it will be an async function, and I will say create, and it will take a menu item, and what will be the type of this one? It will be of type create menu DTO. So I will say const menu equals to new this dot menu model, and I will pass the menu item, okay, and I will say const saved menu equals to menu dot save, okay, and this is a async operation, so I have to await on this. And what I will do, so when we get this value, it will be a large MongoDB object which will have MongoDB operations on it. So now to just create a JavaScript object out of that, what I will do, I'll say to object. Okay, then what I will do, I'll say const underscore underscore v and dash, and I'll take out rest of the value from the menu, saved menu, right? So here what I'm doing the same thing that I was doing here. Here we don't have the option to do the projection. So what I'm doing, I'm saving it to a variable, and from that variable I'm extracting out the version and the rest of the menu item. Okay, and I will return the saved menu item. See, as simple as that. Then let us do the update method. So I will say async update. Okay, and it will take a id of type string and a update item which will be of type update menu dto. Then I will do const updated equals to await this dot menu model dot find by id and update. Okay, I'll pass the id, I'll pass the updated item, and I will add a configuration object. That means, and it will have new true. That means the return value updated will have the new object or the updated value, not the old value. If I don't pass true, it will return me the old value. Okay, so always be mindful of that, and I'll say return updated. Okay, then let us add the delete method. So I'll say delete id of type string, and I will say return this dot menu model dot find by id and delete, and it will take the id. Perfect. So my repository layer is complete. Then I'll come to service. Okay, and here instead of returning this hard-coded string value, let us return the proper menu value. Okay, so here what I will do, I will have to first inject the repository. So I'll say constructor. Okay, and in the constructor I can say private read only. Okay, menu repository, and this is going to be of type menu repository. Okay, then this method, let us work on this get all. So it will say this dot menu repository dot find all. This is all we have to do. Okay, and if you want, you can explicitly give the type, and it will be of type of promise of, okay, menu, and it will be of an array, menu array, right? Then get menu by id. For the get menu by id, what I will do, I'll say const menu equals to this dot menu repository dot find by id. Okay, and it will take the id, and this find by id is an async operation, so I'll await on this, and since I am awaiting, I will mark this as async. Right now, if we don't have any menu item, that means the id is wrong. What I will do, I will throw new not found exception. Okay, and I'll give a message. So say for example, menu not found. Okay, and if this is not the case, we'll simply return the menu. Now for the create new menu item, what I will do, I will say this dot menu repository dot create, and I will pass the create menu item. Then for update, what I will do, I will first mark this as async. Okay, then I will say const updated equals to await, then this dot menu repository dot update, and I'll pass the id, and I'll pass the update menu item. Okay, and I'll do this validation again. So if not updated, that means we are passing the id, right? So it might not be able to find the id. So what I will do, I'll again throw the not found exception. Okay, and if this is not the case, that means we have a valid id and we have a valid update. So all I will do is return updated, and similarly I will mark the delete as a async function. Okay, and what I will do, const deleted equals to await this dot menu repository dot delete, and it will take the ID. And here also I'll do the same logic. Okay, so I'll copy this one and I will paste it here, and I will change the variable name. Okay, and if this is not the case, then I will return deleted. Great. Now let us check the console and see if there are any errors. So if you see, we have unknown dependency exception. Okay, so we have one more thing that is missing, and here what we have to do in menu module, we have to register the schema, right? So for this, what we will do, we'll come to menu module. Okay, and in import, what we have to do, we have to add the import section first. Okay, imports, and here we have to import the mongoose module, mongoose schema that we have created. So I'll say mongoose module dot for feature. Okay, for feature will take an array, and each of the array will have an object, and it will have a name, and it will be menu dot name. So for a class we have a property name. Okay, and we will say schema, it will be menu schema, and I have to add a comma here, right? So we have to register all the schema that we are going to use in a particular module. So now if you see, we don't have any errors, right? Let us go to Postman and let us first create our one menu item, right? So I'll send the request and I'll get a response, right? And I'll go to my MongoDB compass, and I am connected to the database, and I'm inside the restaurant. And let me zoom it this a little bit. Okay, so if you see, I'm in the menus, and if I do a refresh, I'll get the menu item that we have added, right? Great. So I'll get to get all menu, and I'll send a request. So I'll get the menu item, right? And I'll get menu by ID. So I'll pass this value and I will send. So I'll get this particular ID, then I'll update. Okay, so let me update and let me mark the prices to 50. So when I created, it is 240, and if you go to database and if I do a refresh, it is 240, right? Now I'll go to update and I'll mark it as 250 and I will send the request. So now it is saying 250, and if I go to my database and if I do a refresh, I'll get 250, and also this is updated, is available is false, right? This value is also updated, so it is showing false here, right? Then I will take this ID and I will come and I will do a delete operation, right? So I'll send this request and no content, right? So I'll come to the database, and if you see, the item is deleted. Perfect. So our basic CRUD operation is working. Now let us learn a little bit more about validation pipes. So here I'm sending a MongoDB ID, right? So let me take this new ID and fetch this value. Okay, so I can fetch the value, right? But what if I say, for example, ABC? Okay, and I'll send the request, and what has happened? It is throwing internal server error, and this should not be the case, right? Because the user doesn't know if he should send ABC or 1, or he should send 10, or he should send a MongoDB ID, right? This is not user's concern. But even if he's sending some wrong value, the server should not crash. He should not get 500 internal server error. He should get, say for example, bad request error, because the ID 10 doesn't exist in the database, right? So this is the problem. So if you see the console, what is happening? This particular value 10, this is not a valid MongoDB schema ID. So when I'm taking 10 and going to the MongoDB and asking him to give me the value with ID 10, it is failing, right? Because it doesn't identify the value 10. This is not a valid MongoDB schema ID, right? That's why we are getting exception. So what we should do? We should do validation even before going to the database, right? Because if I go to the database with wrong value, it is an unnecessary burden on my database, right? And if you are on a cloud service provider, they will charge you per hit. So if you hit with wrong data, you will get error and you still get charged. So no point in that, right? And of course, if you send wrong data, it will create more load to your database, right? So let us do a validation even before we go to the database, right? So how do we do the validation? We use pipes, validation pipes for this. Okay, so let us learn how to write validation pipes. So I will come out of the menu and I will create a new folder and I will call it as common. So it will have common functionality that might be used across modules, right? And here I'll add another folder and I'll call it as pipes, because I might be writing multiple pipes, right? And here I'll add a new file and I will call it as MongoDB validation pipe.ts, right? Perfect. Now how do we write a pipe? So of course it should be a class, export class, say MongoDB validation pipe. Okay, and it implements pipe transform interface, right? And if it is going to implement pipe transform interface, it has to have this transform function. Now if you see, it is giving squiggly, so let us correct the spelling, validation, right? Okay, now this value is the value on which we are adding the pipe. So in our case, the MongoDB ID, and I will show you how to use this one, but we have to add the validation on this value, right? So I will say if, okay, if not, okay, types will come from mongoose. Okay, we have a function to do the validation actually. Okay, object id dot is valid, and I will say value. That means if this value is not a valid MongoDB type ID, I will say row new bad request exception. Okay, and I will say invalid ID, and the spelling is not correct, it should be new. Okay, and if this is not the case, if it is valid, I'll say return value. See, this is as simple as this one. And we have to have the add injectable decorator. Now how do we use this one? So we'll come to menu, we'll come to controller, and here I want to do the validation, right? So I'm taking param id, and here I will pass the pipe as the second argument. So it is MongoDB validation pipe. So I will say MongoDB validation pipe. Now this pipe will be executed every time we parse the param value from the HTTP request. Okay, so now let us come to Postman and hit this request again. So earlier we were getting 500. Now let us see now we are getting 400 bad request. So this is how you add validation pipelines. Now can I optimize this further? This application is going to use MongoDB, and this is not the only place where I'm going to parse the MongoDB ID in my param, right? I have it here in the update menu, I have it here in the delete menu as well, right? So now let me extract this param ID along with this validation pipeline into a separate decorator. So I'll come to common, I'll add a new folder and I'll call it as decorators. Okay, and here I'll add a new file and I will call it as mongo params.decorator.ts, right? So I'll be using this decorator to fetch the MongoDB parameter. So I'll say export function, I will say mongo param, and it will have a param name, it will be of type string. Okay, so if you see, we were taking a parameter name, right, this string. So this is what I'm passing it here. Okay, so this will return what we already have, the param decorator, right? This it will return along with the param name and MongoDB validation pipeline. Just a wrapper, nothing more, just a wrapper, simple wrapper. Okay, now what I will do, I will come here and instead of param, I will say mongo param. And we don't have to pass this validation pipeline anymore, right? Because if you see, it is taking only one param and we are importing the MongoDB validation pipe. So we don't have to pass it from here, right? So I will copy this one and I will use it here, and I can use it here also. And in many other places I can use this, right? So I've just created a handy functionality, right? Now I will come here and I will send this request. Of course, I'll get the invalid ID. And here also, if I send some gibberish value, right? And if I say I'll get the invalid ID, and similarly for this also delete, right? So here also I'm getting the same invalid ID. So now if you see here, now we are able to handle the invalid ID or the bad request. But if you see, we have a different format of response here, that is the error format, and we have a different kind of format when we are getting the proper response, right? Lot of times your APIs are not only consumed by a front end, but sometimes automated system and even other APIs consume your API that you are trying to write. And most of the time they expect the API to be uniform, even if you are getting error or even if you are getting success response. So now let us try to bring some uniformity to our API, even in error case and even in success case, right? So what I want to do is I want to have say for example HTTP status code and the status whether our API failed or it succeeded, and then we have data and error. In both error and success we will have both the field data as well as error. In case of success we will keep the error null and we'll have the data field which will have this data that the API is trying to give us, and in case of error we'll have the error field and the data field would be empty or null, right? So let us design our API in that way. And what we are going to use for the success scenario, let us use another core fundamental NestJS concept, that is interceptor. We'll write an interceptor that will intercept the response, and even it can intercept the request, and it will restructure the response that we are giving back. Okay, so let us start by writing our first interceptor. So I will come to my VS Code, and in common I will add another folder and I will name it as interceptors, and I will add one file and I will name it as response format interceptor.ts. okay, and what is the interceptor? How do we write an interceptor? Of course it will be a class, right? So I'll say export class response format interceptor. Okay, and this is going to implement nest interceptor. Okay, and what we will do, see it is giving squiggly, right? Why? Because we have to implement the intercept method, right? So we'll go to quick fix and we'll say implement interface. Okay, so it has implemented the interface intercept, right? So what this is doing, this is taking a context and this is taking the next call handler, and what it is returning, it is returning an observable. Then what we will do, so somehow we have to get the HTTP response, right? Okay, so how do we get the HTTP response? We are going to use the context parameter. Okay, so I'm going to say const and say for example ctx equals to context dot switch to HTTP, right? So first what I'm doing, I'm switching it to HTTP, so we'll get the HTTP methods on this. Okay, then const response equals to context dot get response. Okay, then now we have the response. Now what we have to do, we have to return. Okay, and in return we'll call the next, and in the next we have a handle method. Okay, so what we will do, we'll say return next dot handle. Okay, and what I will do, I will pipe into this, that means I'm trying to intercept this one. Okay, inside this pipe what we will use, we are going to use map. Now which map is this? This is not the JavaScript map, but this map will come from our observable, that is RxJS. Okay, so I'll say map. Okay, map, and it will take the data, and what this will do, this will return, and this data is nothing but the final response that we are sending. Okay, and here we will try to enhance this one. So I'll say HTTP, I will say HTTP code, and this will be response dot status code, right? Then we will say status, and let us call it as a success status. Okay, and then let us have the data field, and then let us add the error as null. Okay, great. So now we have added this value. Now how do we use this one? Okay, so say for example here in the get menu by ID we are getting a success response, right? So I'll come to VS Code and I'll open my controller, and I will come here get menu by ID, and here I will say add use interceptors, and I will say response format interceptor, right? And I will save this one, and when I will come to my VS code and I'll hit this request, what will happen? See how the data is now changed. So now we have the HTTP status code and we have the status as success, we have some data, and we have error which is null in this case. Now when other people are consuming your API, they will find some uniformity, what is happening, what data point we have to access, what do we have a status or we have a HTTP code, right? This kind of information helps them to use your APIs more efficiently. Okay, great. Now what will happen if I do this on get all menu item, right? Is this going to work? Is this going to give the output in this format? No, right? Okay, why not? Because where we are using it only on the get menu by ID controller, right? We are not using on get all menu. Now you have one option, either to use it wherever you need or you can make it global. Okay, so I'll remove it from here and I will mark this as a global interceptor. And how do I do this? I will come to the main.ts, okay, and here I will say app.use global interceptors, okay, and I will say new response format interceptor, and I will save this one. Now when I come here and I send a request, this value is still showing in the expected format, the updated format. Now if I come here and I will send this, now if you see here also we are now getting it in the enhanced format that we are trying to do, right? Great. So one part is completed. Now let us come to delete menu, and when I send this request, this is still not formatted, right? This is still in the old format. Now I want to change it to similar format as I'm getting in other places, all the success places, right? So for this, what we have to use? Interceptor cannot enhance this because this is an exception that is being thrown. And to handle the exception, what I have to do? I have to write a global HTTP exception filter, right? Okay, so let us start writing that, and in the meantime we'll explain how it will work. Okay, so here in common I will add another folder and I'll call it as filters. Okay, and here I will add a file and I will call it as http exception filter.ts. okay, as always this is going to be a class. Okay, export class, and I will say all exception filter, and what this will implement? This will implement exception filter. Okay, then it has to have a catch method. Now anytime any exception is thrown from our code, this exception handler or this all exception filter will get executed, right? So we'll do the same thing here. So what we'll do, we'll first get the context. So here I will say const ctx, and from where we will get, this time we will get it from host. Okay, host dot switch to http. Okay, and after that I will say const response equals to ctx dot get response. Okay, and const I will say request equals to context dot get request. Great. Now what I will do, first let me initialize few variables. Okay, so I will say let status equals to 500, and eventually we will override with the actual status that the exception is thrown with. So let the default status be 500, and let us say message. Okay, and this is going to be of type string or array of string. Okay, and for now let me initialize this with internal server error. Okay, and let me also say error type. Okay, and this is going to be of type internal server error. Okay, great. Now we have the exception type, right? So first let us check what is the type of exception. So I'll say if exception instance of http exception, okay, then we'll do something. If this is not of type http exception, okay, now what are the http exceptions? The 400 and the 500, right? The bad request and 404 not found, right? So if this is of any of the type of http exception, then we will do something. Okay, otherwise we will have this default error message. Okay, so we will say the status. Okay, status will be exception dot get status. Then what I will do, I will create the response. So this will be exception response. Okay, and this I will get from exception dot get response. Now the exception response, it can either be a string or it could be an object or an array, right? So I'll do some validation. Okay, so if type of exception response, okay, if this is string, then what I will do, I will say message equals to exception response, because this is a string, right? And if this is an object, okay, then I will say else if, okay, if this is an object, I will say type of, okay, exception response is an object. Okay, what I will do, I will say message, okay, equals to exception response dot message, okay, or we'll default it to the message that we already have. And it is giving this message is not defined, so what I will do, I will say as any, because we don't know what the type of this exception response is going to be. And what else we can update, we can update the error type. Okay, so I will say error type equals to exception response as any dot error, okay, otherwise we'll default it to the error type, which is this one, internal server error. Okay, great. Now what we will do, we'll send the response. Okay, so here I will say response dot status, and it will have the status, right? The status is coming from this one. Okay, so status, and I will say dot json, and we'll send the JSON object. So we'll send the same HTTP code. So HTTP code equals to status, and status will be failure, okay, and data. So data would be null in this case, and error would be message, and error type, right? So if you see the format that we are using here, so HTTP status code and status, right? So HTTP status code and status, and the data, this will be null, and the error message, it will have the message and the error type. Okay, then how to use this one, we have the global filters, right? So I will come here and I will say app dot use global filters. Okay, and here I will say new all exception filter. I'll do this, and I will come to console and see if there are any errors. Here if you see there are no errors, so I'll come to postman and I will send a request. So let me send the request, and if you see we have the status 400 and failure, and data is null and error. So message, it is invalid ID, and error type is bad request, right? So now we have some kind of uniformity in our response. Okay, great. Now you say, for example, you come to create new menu, right? And the diet preference, it is supposed to be vegetarian, and I will say 1 2 3. Okay, now what will happen, I'll send the request. Okay, here if you see we are still getting the response in the same format. Okay, so data, and say for example error, and we have the message, diet preference must be one of the following, right? And say for example is available, I'll say true 1. So here also we have the same value, same format, right? So now we have some kind of consistency in the response that we are trying to send. Now let us understand a little bit of security. Okay, so now we are sending the input from the client side. Okay, now what will happen if somebody is trying to send malicious content like this? Okay, so say script, okay, and something like this. Okay, so is this something to be worried about? And the answer is definitely yes. Okay, so this is what is called as a cross-site scripting attack. Somebody can send script to your backend, and when this script will be rendered in the front end, it will execute, because this script tag is something the browser can execute, right? And within the script tag, anything can be added. We can steal the cookie, we can redirect to a different website, right? Lot of mischievous thing can be done if we are able to inject script. Okay, and this is what is called as XSS attack. Now our responsibility is to prevent this kind of XSS attack. Okay, so what I will do, I will come to my database and just do a refresh, and I will delete this particular entry. Okay, and here what I will do, I will send this request with this kind of script. Okay, so if I send this one, and I will change this diet preference, okay, to valid string, and I will send this. Okay, so now if you see, it has sent this with this script tag. Okay, and if you see it in the database also, if I refresh, okay, this is with the script tag, okay, and this is not something you ever want in your system, in your database. Okay, you should always protect against XSS attacks. Okay, so how do we do this? We are going to use a library, and here I want to introduce you to the concept of middleware. This is another fundamental concept of NestJs, and we are going to leverage the power of middleware to sanitize our input. Okay, great. So let me delete this one also. Okay, then what I will do, I will come to the terminal, and this is the server terminal that is running. I'll keep this running. I'll open another instance of the terminal, and I will say npm install XSS. This is the npm library that we have. This will help us in sanitizing this kind of input string, this script type of input string. Okay, so let me install this one. Great. Now what I will do, I'll come to VS Code. Okay, and in common I will add another folder, and I'll call it as middleware, and I will name it as, you can say, sanitize XSS middleware.ts. okay, great. Now how do we write middleware? So I'll say export class, okay, sanitize XSS middleware, and it implements an nest middleware, right? Great. And what it has to implement, it has to implement the use method. So this use method has the request and the response. Okay, now let me create a helper function. Okay, and I will say private sanitize the object. Okay, and this object could be of any type, right? We don't know what will be the type of the object, so it should work on any type of data, right? And if you see here, this spelling is not correct, so let me correct this spelling. Okay, then what we will do, we will loop through all the key of the object. Okay, and if the key is a string type, okay, we will sanitize. If the key is another object, that is nested object, we'll call the sanitize object function again, right? So this is a recursive implementation. Okay, so I'll say for const key in obj, what I will do, okay, and I will say if type of, then obj of key, if this is type of string, okay, what I will do, I will say obj of key equals to XSS. Okay, and this is the npm package that we installed just now, right? So I will pass this, and what value I will pass, I'll pass the obj of key. Okay, so this function, what it will do, it will sanitize it. It will convert the angle bracket to &lt and &gt, right? So this is no longer a executable script tag. Okay, then else if, okay, if type of obj of key equals to object, okay, and this is not null. Okay, so if obj of key is not equals to null, then what we will do, we'll recursively call this. Okay, so obj of key equals to this dot sanitize object, and I will say object of key. Okay, so this will do the recursive sanitization, and at the end what I will return, I will say return the object that we are receiving from here, right? Great. So now the helper function is completed. So I will say if request dot body, that means it has a body, and type of this body, that is request dot body, is an object, then what I will do, I will say request dot body, I will change this body, and what I will do, I will say this dot sanitize object, and what I will pass, I will pass the request dot body, right? So this will do the sanitization, and once this is done, what I will do, I have to call the next function. So if I don't call the next function, the next line of code will not be executed, right? So I will use this one. So this is the middleware definition is complete. Now how to use this one? So now we will come to app.module. Okay, and in the app.module we have a configure method. Okay, configure, and what this will take, this will take a consumer, and this is going to be of type middleware consumer. Okay, and here I will say consumer dot apply. Okay, what I will apply here, I have to give the middleware names. Okay, so I'll say sanitize XSS middleware, and for which route. Okay, so for route, and how many routes we have? We have only one route, right? Menu controller. So I will say menu controller. So here what I am doing in the app module, I am applying the XSS middleware in menu controller. Okay, that means when menu controller is executed, this XSS middleware will be executed before it reaches the controller, and it will do the sanitization for us, right? So now if we go to database, we have already deleted the value, right? So now let us come to Postman, and let me still try to send this kind of script tag. Okay, so let me send this one. Okay, so here we are getting some internal server error. Okay, so there is some problem with the code. So let us check. So here, if we come to this sanitize middleware, here this XSS is not the function that we want. We want rather the, so from here we have the filter XSS method, right? So this is the one that we should actually use. So this filter XSS, this will do the actual filtering, and this is coming from the XSS module, right? So now I save this one, and I'll come to Postman, and here I will try to send the data, right? Now here if you see, we have the success status, and if you see the description here, the angle bracket or the script tag is no longer valid because the angle bracket is converted to %lt, right? So this is how you can use middleware to do sanitization. So this is one of the use case of a middleware that I have shown, but you can use it in infinite number of ways, right? So this is the core fundamental concept of using a middleware. Great. So now let us go to another fundamental concept of NestJS, that is guard. So what is a guard? Say for example, you want to restrict the access to a controller. Say for example, there is an authentication guard. So if the user is not authenticated, they will not be allowed to access to the controller. So this is the concept of a guard. It will restrict based on certain condition, right? Now in our case, we are not going to write auth guards because we don't have the authentication system currently in place. So let us write some different type of guard to understand how guards work in NestJS. Okay, so let me take an example. Say for example, the get menu by ID and get all menu. Since this is a menu functionality, we will only allow it when the restaurant is open. Say for example, right? And let us say the restaurant opens from say 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. just as an example. Okay, so what I want to do is to write a guard that prevents the access of menu, that is the get all menu and get menu by ID, during the hours in which the business is closed, the restaurant is closed, and only allow when the restaurant is open, right? Say for example, this get menu by ID, right? So I will send a request, and we are getting the proper value here, right? And here also we are getting the proper value. So now let us start writing the guards. So I'll come to common, and I will add new folder, and I will call it as guards. Okay, and here I'll add a new file, and let us call it as time-based guards.ts. okay, and this is as usual a class, right? So export class, I'll say time-based guard, and what it will do, it will implement the can activate interface, right? So this is what is a guard. Then I will say can activate, I'll implement that particular method. I will say current hour equals to new date dot get hours, right? So what is the current hour? Now what we will do, we will say if, okay, current hour, say for example greater than equal to 9 and current hour less than 17. Okay, now what does this mean? This means from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. okay, of course you can change these values based on your need, right? So we will say return true. Otherwise, if this is not the case, I will say throw new, and I will say forbidden exception, and I will say access allowed only between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Great. Now how to use this one? So we will come to our controller, and here, okay, here on get all menu, I will say use guards, and I will say time based guard. Okay, and I will do the same thing for get menu by ID also. Okay, Then I will come to Postman, and earlier I was able to make the request, right? Now current time for me is not between the 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., right? So I will send the request and it will say failure. Okay, 403 forbidden access is allowed only between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Okay, so now we are able to use guard to do some kind of validation, and it will not even reach the controller if the guard doesn't allow. Okay, great. So that's how you can use guards. Okay, now with this we have completed the basic fundamental concept of NestJS. I have explained you all the core building block of any NestJS project, and in future video we will discuss more about NestJS. We will dive deep into individual concepts like guards and pipes and interceptors. We'll do in depth. We will learn about different database, different HTTP patterns, and many more things. For now, I'll conclude on this course the introduction to NestJS. I really hope that you liked this video, you learned something new from this video, and if so, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of content I bring on a regular basis on this channel, and I'll see you in the next video.